Before we dive in, tell me where you're listening from and what pulled you into this story. If it spoke to you, drop a comment. Your words help keep history's forgotten voices alive. Let the torches flicker. Let the villa hold its breath. The night the assassins came for Agrippina, even the sea outside her villa seemed to go still. Moonlight cut across the marble floors like a blade. Lamps sputtered in the hall. Footsteps padded through the corridor. Slow, deliberate, the kind of steps taken by men with orders they don't want to carry out but will anyway, because an emperor told them to. Those men weren't just carrying weapons, they were carrying Rome's terror. Agrippina knew what this was. She'd survived Caligula, she'd survived exile, she'd survived a shipwreck that was supposed to kill her. She'd survived every senator who tried to bury her, every whisper that tried to ruin her, every courtier who trembled at the idea of a woman outsmarting them. But your own son? That was a betrayal Rome itself couldn't have choreographed better. She rose from her couch, calm, composed, her hair loose around her shoulders, and stared at the men who had once bowed to her as the mother of the emperor. She didn't scream. She didn't beg, she didn't even blink. Ancient writers claim she touched her stomach and said, "Strike here first, the womb that bore Nero." Whether she said it or not, it feels true, because Agrippina always understood the symbolism of her life and of her death. She was not killed for crimes, she was killed for competence. And in the long echo of that night, one question rises like smoke. How did a girl born into the deadliest dynasty in history become the only woman Rome ever feared enough to destroy twice, once in life and once in memory? To answer that, you have to walk back into the world that made her, not Nero's world, not Claudius's world, not Caligula's world, her world. The woman Rome feared more than emperors. Born into a dynasty where love was a liability. Rome liked to pretend it was a civilization. Agrippina grew up knowing it was a machine, and she was born straight into the gears. She entered the world in 15 CE, a daughter of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, a family so tangled with power and paranoia that you could map its family tree only if you didn't mind bloodstains on the parchment. Her mother, Agrippina the Elder, was a war hero's daughter. Strong, patriotic, too outspoken for the Senate's comfort. Her father, Germanicus, was the golden boy of Rome, beloved by the public, adored by his soldiers, destined for the throne. And because he was beloved, he died young, conveniently young. Agrippina the Elder was exiled after accusing the Emperor Tiberius of murder. She died by starvation. The message for her daughter was carved in stone. In this family, loyalty is not rewarded. Obedience is not optional. Survival is not guaranteed. Agrippina was still a child when her uncle Tiberius branded her family traitors. Still young when her brother, the future Emperor Caligula, learned that cruelty was currency. Still young when she realized tears were dangerous and silence was armor. Nothing about her childhood was soft. She grew up watching senators smile while plotting, courtiers flatter while betraying, and imperial relatives vanish whenever they became too popular. She learned early that Rome didn't care who you loved, only who you threatened. The danger wasn't just outside the palace walls. It was the palace. By the time Agrippina was 10, she had already witnessed her mother exiled, her brothers imprisoned, her entire branch of the family labeled enemies, her own name whispered with suspicion. Most children fear the dark. Agrippina learned to fear torchlight, because it revealed the faces of the men who judged her fate. But here's the part historians forget to mention. She didn't break. If anything, she calcified, she sharpened, and she memorized every lesson Rome taught her. Power protects. Weakness invites death. Women survive by thinking faster than the men who underestimate them. The girl who watched her family destroyed wasn't traumatized into silence. She was trained into mastery. Because Agrippina didn't just inherit a dynasty, she inherited a battlefield, and she was going to win. The girl who refused to die. Quietly, If childhood taught Agrippina that Rome devoured its own, adolescence taught her something even more useful. If you can't outrun the machine, learn to drive it. But Rome had rules for women, rules Agrippina treated like furniture, something to be moved aside when inconvenient. She entered adulthood the way other people enter battle, armed, alert, already calculating. Her beauty was undeniable, but beauty wasn't her weapon. Her mind was. She spoke with precision, observed like a hawk, remembered everything, and trusted almost no one. Even the palace slaves said she never walked through a hallway without knowing who stood behind her. Rome took note. So did Caligula. Yes, that Caligula. Emperor, maniac, murderer, her brother. When he rose to power, the empire held its breath. Agrippina didn't. She already knew exactly what her brother was capable of. Caligula loved cruelty the way other men loved wine. He punished for sport. He humiliated senators just to watch them sweat. He turned court dinners into blood-soaked theatre. Agrippina was one of the few who truly understood the danger. And here's the twist modern retellings miss. She wasn't a victim cowering in the corner. She was navigating an active minefield, successfully. Caligula rewarded loyalty one day and executed it the next. He elevated favorites in the morning and tortured them before dusk. In that world, survival wasn't luck. It was skill. Agrippina survived, not because she was harmless, but because she was useful. Because she knew how to be invisible without ever being forgotten. Because she watched and waited and learned. And Rome watched her right back. Marriage, Rome's original political trap. At just 13 or 14, the sources argue, because Rome didn't bother remembering women's ages, she was married off to Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus. Ahenobarbus was rich. Ahenobarbus was powerful. Ahenobarbus was also, according to Roman historians, vile in every way. They listed his traits like a grocery list of red flags: violent, arrogant, corrupt, fond of cruelty. When someone asked him what he expected from marriage, he reportedly said, "Nothing but a daughter who will be the ruin of Rome." Agrippina filed that comment away. Rome would later decide she ruined everything. But the truth? Rome was already rotting before she ever entered the palace. Her marriage was a battlefield disguised as domestic life. Ahenobarbus boasted about killing a man for fun. He whipped servants for entertainment. He attended dinner parties where the wine flowed, and so did his temper. Agrippina endured it all with that same lethal patience she'd perfected under Caligula. And then, another twist fate threw her way. She became a mother. To a son. To Nero. Rome would one day call him a monster. But in this moment, he was her leverage, her lifeline, her proof that she could create life even in a world obsessed with taking it from her. She raised Nero not with tenderness. Rome had beaten softness out of her, but with strategy. She whispered to him the way her own mother had once whispered about justice. Only this time, the lesson was different. Survive. Outsmart. Strike first. But while Agrippina planned for Nero's future, Rome planned against her. Fall from favor and survival by rage. Caligula turned on her, as Caligula turned on everyone. He accused Agrippina and her sister of conspiracy, not because they plotted anything, but because Caligula believed paranoia was a governing strategy. They were exiled, their wealth was seized, their reputations were shattered. Rome expected Agrippina to break, to fade, to vanish into the oblivion where exiled women died forgotten. Instead, she sharpened into something even more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose. In exile, stripped of her titles and comforts, she watched the empire from afar, cataloguing every shift in power. She knew Caligula wouldn't last. Tyrants either burn fast or burn everything. And he burned fast. When Caligula was assassinated by his own guards, Agrippina's exile ended, and she did not return humbled. She returned focused. Rome was now ruled by Emperor Claudius, bumbling bookish, underestimated, and completely unprepared for a woman like Agrippina. She saw opportunity. She saw weakness. She saw a door half open, and she walked straight through it. Because Agrippina the Younger had one goal left, to place her son on the throne and carve her legacy into the marble of Roman history. It was time to stop surviving Rome's game. It was time to master it. The making of a kingmaker. When Agrippina returned from exile, Rome expected a ghost, broken, grateful, humbled. Instead, it got a woman carved from steel. Caligula was dead. A Praetorian coup had shoved the trembling, scholarly Claudius onto the throne. The Senate mocked him. The elites dismissed him. But Agrippina, she saw potential. Weak men are easy to steer. Lonely men are even easier. Claudius was both. He was intelligent, yes, a historian at heart, but shy, awkward, limping through power like a man wearing shoes that didn't quite fit. He stuttered. He hesitated. He relied on the people around him to filter the world. Agrippina recognized an empire-sized opening, but she didn't sprint toward it. She glided. Her first move? Reputation rehab. Rome may have slandered her, adulteress, conspirator, viper, but she walked back into the city with the grace of a woman who knew her value. She dressed modestly, spoke softly, and let the nobility believe she'd been chastened. She attended ceremonies, she offered condolences, she let the rumor mill paint her as a reformed woman who wanted only to restore dignity to her fallen family. Underestimate me, she thought, please. The marriage that redefined. Rome, Claudius was a widower, and the imperial palace was drifting without a North Star. His advisors nudged him toward marriage. Politics needed a stabilizing female presence. Agrippina did not wait to be chosen. She orchestrated support from senators, aristocrats, and even the Praetorian Guard. She reminded Rome that she was not merely a widow. She was the daughter of Germanicus, the empire's long-lost golden prince, whom the people still worshipped like a saint. Marrying Agrippina wasn't scandal. It was strategy. It was public relations. It was tapping into the nostalgia of a better Rome. Claudius proposed. Rome gasped. Agrippina accepted with perfect, measured enthusiasm. Suddenly she was no longer a disgraced exile, she was empress. But this wasn't about Claudius, it was about Nero, the adoption that changed the world. Agrippina's next move was bold enough to make the Senate choke on its wine. She convinced Claudius to adopt her son. Nero, once a boy with a deadbeat father and a disgraced mother, now became the emperor's heir, placed ahead of Claudius's own biological son Britannicus. This was political sorcery. This was chess played across a continent. Agrippina knew exactly what she was doing. Put Nero next to the throne early so the throne feels inevitable. She arranged his education under Seneca, one of Rome's greatest philosophers. She ensured he was seen in public, speaking at ceremonies, shaking hands with soldiers and aristocrats. She made the empire comfortable with the idea of Nero before Nero ever understood what power tasted like. And then she did something even more shocking. She took a seat next to the emperor at public events. Women didn't do that. Women weren't allowed to do that. Women were supposed to sit behind curtains, behind screens, behind the men who claimed to speak for them. Agrippina didn't sit behind anyone. She appeared beside Claudius in gold and jewels, carrying herself with the presence of a co-ruler. Rome whispered, "Is she running the empire?" Rome speculated, "Is this legal?" Rome feared, "What will she do next?" Agrippina smiled. Enemies multiply, and Agrippina counts. Them, every political genius collects enemies like magnets collect iron filings. Agrippina's enemies were legion. Senators who resented her influence, nobles furious at Nero's adoption, supporters of Britannicus, moral conservatives who despised powerful women, the old guard who believed Rome was collapsing into decadence. She kept a mental list of every man who opposed her. Not out of paranoia, out of preparation. Because she knew something they refused to admit. The emperor was aging. And succession is a blood sport in Rome. If Claudius died naturally, Nero would ascend with minimal resistance. If Claudius didn't die naturally, well, whispers swirled in later histories, claiming Agrippina poisoned him with mushrooms at a banquet. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. Rome never needed proof to condemn a woman who refused to apologize for being smarter than every man in the room. But what matters is this: Claudius died. Nero became emperor at 16, and Agrippina, finally, was the most powerful woman on earth, not behind the throne, not beside the throne, but above it, a kingmaker, a strategist, a mother who had pulled the entire empire into the palm of her hand. But empires don't stay grateful, and sons don't stay loyal. The next chapter isn't triumph, it's betrayal, it's tragedy, it's Nero versus Agrippina, a collision Rome still talks about like a myth. Mother, monarch, monster. The rise and rupture of Nero and Agrippina. When Nero became emperor at 16, Rome erupted in celebration. The people adored him before they ever heard him speak. He was young, handsome, artistic, the adopted son of the beloved Germanicus, the dynasty they wished they still had. But the empire didn't cheer for Nero, not really. They cheered because they believed Agrippina would be running the show. And for a while, she did. The co-rule that Rome pretended not to see. On Nero's earliest coins, two faces appear, Nero on one side, Agrippina on the other. Do you know how rare that is? Roman coins were political manifestos, messages hammered into metal. Putting Agrippina on a coin wasn't just unusual, it was treason adjacent. It was a declaration. The emperor shares his power with his mother. Agrippina attended Senate meetings, she conducted diplomatic receptions, she reviewed petitions, she negotiated alliances. Nothing and no one reached Nero without passing through her shadow. To the Senate, she was a nightmare. To Nero's tutors, she was a relief. To the Praetorian Guard, she was the reason they tolerated a teenage emperor. And to Nero himself, she was inconvenient. At first, the boy who loved the crown, more than his mother Nero, loved being adored. He loved music, poetry, performance, the applause, the attention, the mirrors. What he did not love was control, and Agrippina's control was absolute. She hovered, she corrected, she reminded him, "You owe the throne to me. A truth is a blade, repeated truth is a wound." Nero began chafing. He wanted independence, not political, but emotional. He wanted to be seen as the man in charge, not the boy propped on a throne by his mother's will. And then, of course, there was Poppaea Sabina. Enter Poppaea, beautiful, ambitious, and deadly Poppaea. Sabina was the kind of Roman beauty poets wasted ink on. Golden hair, flawless skin, a voice like silk sliding over marble. But beneath the softness was iron. She wanted to be empress, and she saw the obstacle immediately. "Agrippina!" Poppaea whispered into Nero's ear. Agrippina shouted in his face. Nero began to listen to the whisper. "Poppaea, you're emperor!" "Agrippina, you're emperor because I made you emperor." The conflict was inevitable. Agrippina versus Nero. The empire holds its breath. Agrippina tried everything. She scolded Nero publicly. She threatened to support Britannicus. She reminded him that Rome respected her more than him. She warned him Poppaea was using him. None of it worked. Nero felt humiliated. He felt cornered. He felt for the first time that the throne didn't belong to him as long as Agrippina lived. He began stripping her of power. First her guards, then her attendants, then her place at court, then her political privileges. And then he did something unthinkable. He removed her face from the coins. It was the closest thing to erasure the Romans had. Agrippina responded with ice, not fire. "Sons who forget their mothers," she said, "forget themselves." But Nero only heard a threat. The poisoned cup, the collapsing boat, and the woman who wouldn't die. Historians tell the story, half in horror, half in awe. Nero tried to kill Agrippina more than once. first with poison. She survived. Then with a ceiling rigged to fall on her bed, she wasn't in it. And then, the infamous collapsing boat plot. Nero invited her to a coastal villa, lavished her with false affection, and put her on a ship deliberately engineered to fold in on itself in the middle of the night. Agrippina knew. When the boat began to crumble and slaves screamed and oars snapped, she didn't panic. She swam. Roman soldiers waiting on shore saw a dripping, furious Agrippina walking out of the waves like a myth. A mother who refused to die, a woman too intelligent to underestimate, too composed to fear. She sent Nero a message. I survived, I know. Nero unraveled. If she lived, she would expose him. If she died by accident again, no one would believe it. So he chose the one option left, the one Rome still whispers like a curse. Matricide Nero sent assassins to her villa. Agrippina understood immediately when she saw them. She knew her son, her creation, had finally decided he could only rule if she no longer existed. She did not beg, she did not weep, she did not flee. The final words attributed to her, whether true or embroidered by chroniclers, are chilling and iconic. Strike the womb, it bore Nero. Rome did not mourn her. Rome feared her even in death. When news spread, Nero celebrated, then panicked, then drank, then wailed. His guilt twisted into paranoia that would poison the rest of his reign. A mother murdered by the son she crowned. An empire shaken by the woman it tried to forget. A legend born from the ashes of betrayal. The afterlife of Agrippina. How Rome buried her story and why it failed. The morning after Agrippina's murder, Nero expected relief. Instead, he found silence. Not the kind that soothes, the kind that suffocates. Even the Senate, a body that had despised Agrippina, feared her, resented her, did not immediately celebrate her death. They looked at Nero and saw something they could never unsee, a boy emperor covered in the moral blood of his own mother. Rome could tolerate cruelty, Rome could tolerate corruption, Rome could even tolerate madness. But matricide? That was a stain on the soul. Nero's first mistake, trying to pretend it never happened. Nero performed grief like a bad actor performing Shakespeare. He announced Agrippina had died suddenly. No one believed him. Then he claimed she died in an accident. Everyone heard the rumors. When that didn't work, he accused her of plotting against him, which only made him look weaker. Finally, he staged a ridiculous funeral with cheap theatrics because the real danger wasn't Agrippina's death. It was Agrippina's memory. A dead woman cannot claw her way back into a palace. A dead woman cannot command legions. But a remembered woman, a mythologized woman, a feared woman, that woman can topple a dynasty. Rome begins its rewriting. The Senate, eager to align itself with Nero's trembling ego, passed a decree condemning Agrippina. Ambitious beyond womanly measure. Corrupt. Manipulative. Dangerous. It was political absolution disguised as moral clarity. Agrippina went from co-ruler to cautionary tale in a single afternoon. History books began calling her unnatural, unmotherly, monstrous. Her intelligence became scheming, her influence became witchcraft, her power became poison. Classic Roman politics. When a woman is too powerful to forget, they rewrite her until she is unrecognizable. Nero's propaganda was Agrippina's shadow. Nero tried everything. He banned portraits of her. He forbade public mourning. He ordered statues removed, inscriptions erased. He tried to extinguish her like a candle, but Agrippina refused to stay dead. Rumors spread across Rome. Her ghost stalked the palace halls. Storms were punishment for her murder. Nero's nightmares were curses. Every bad omen, every lightning strike, every eclipse was blamed on Agrippina's wrath. People whispered that her spirit appeared near the bay of Miseno, drifting along the shoreline where her blood had been spilled. Sailors avoided the cove, Fishermen left offerings. Mothers told their daughters, when a woman's story is stolen, she returns for it. Nero's downfall was the echo of Agrippina. As Nero slid deeper into paranoia, killing rivals, performing on stage, losing the loyalty of the army, Rome began murmuring, "This is Agrippina's revenge." They believed she cursed him. They believed her death had unmoored the empire. They believed Nero was haunted in every room he stepped into. And in a way, they were right. Agrippina was the spine of his legitimacy. She was the architect of his rise. Without her, he was a boy with a crown too heavy for his neck. The mother who outlived her son, in every way that matters. When Nero died, alone, abandoned, hunted, the Senate rushed to restore order by erasing him too. Damnatio memoriae. The Roman unmaking of a life. His statues smashed, his inscriptions chiseled off, his name dragged into darkness. But Agrippina? She could not be erased. Every chronicler wrote about her, every historian wrestled with her, every emperor, after Nero, learned from her story, either to fear powerful mothers or to fear powerful women, period. She became a warning, a myth, a fascination, not because she was monstrous, but because she lived in a world built for men and dared not only to survive it, she mastered it. The legacy Rome couldn't bury. Agrippina rises in every retelling. In art, she is regal and imperious. In theatre, she is cunning and unstoppable. In scholarship, she becomes one of the most politically sophisticated women of antiquity. In feminist history, she is reclaimed as a strategist, a survivor, a stateswoman shaped by brutality. 2,000 years later, her name still sparks debate. Was she ruthless? Yes. Was she ambitious? Absolutely. But was she evil? Or was she simply playing the only game Rome ever respected and playing it better than the men who wrote her legacy? Agrippina's story doesn't end with her murder. It ends here, with a truth Rome couldn't rewrite. She terrified an empire not because she was a monster, but because she proved a woman could rule one. Myth, memory, and misogyny. Why history needed Agrippina to be a villain? You've heard the phrase, history is written by the victors, but in Rome, history was written by the survivors. And the truth about Agrippina is this. The men who survived her were the men who needed her to be a monster, to justify killing her, to justify fearing her, to justify erasing the parts of her that were brilliant, strategic, and terrifyingly competent. The Rome that recorded her story was a Rome deeply invested in one idea: a woman who wields power must be wicked, and they built Agrippina's legend to prove it. The Roman historian problem, when every pen is a sword: Tacitus, Suetonius, Cassius, Dio. Three men whose writings shape almost everything we know about Agrippina. Three men who absolutely hated powerful women. Tacitus admitted it openly. Women's involvement in politics is a mark of corruption. So when Agrippina influenced policy, diplomacy, or succession, Tacitus didn't call it leadership. He called it manipulation, depravity, witchcraft, incest, seduction, ambition, unbefitting her sex. Rome didn't have a category for a woman who governed well, so they created one: the femme fatale empress, the poisoner, the temptress, the monster in the palace, a myth powerful enough to survive centuries. Agrippina was Rome's favorite genre, the dangerous woman. Rome loved a cautionary tale, especially one starring a woman who didn't know her place. And Agrippina checked every box: beautiful, politically skilled, connected to the Julio-Claudian bloodline, intelligent, unshakably ambitious, able to outmaneuver senators, mother to an emperor. Rome looked at her and saw one thing: a threat, so they turned her into a story meant to scare future women into silence. The mother who murdered her way to the throne. The seductress who controlled emperors. The empress who slept with her son. A lie so desperate it reveals more about the storyteller than its subject. These weren't facts, they were weapons, the double standard that built an empire picture. A man kills his rivals? Strategist? A woman kills her rivals, murderess. A man uses marriage to gain power, diplomat. A woman does the same, manipulator. A man mentors his son, statesman. A woman mentors her son, overbearing, unnatural, scheming. And here's the dagger. Rome was full of power-hungry men who poisoned brothers, strangled cousins, bribed armies, and married strategically. But none of them were remembered the way Agrippina was. Because when a man reaches for power, history writes a biography. When a woman reaches for power, history writes a warning. Why Rome needed her to be the villain. Even after her death. Agrippina's real crimes were simple. She was brilliant. She understood politics better than the Senate. She refused to be silent. She survived long enough to make men nervous. She birthed an emperor who couldn't survive without her. When Rome killed her, they still weren't safe. Because a woman like Agrippina doesn't just influence politics, she influences memory. So Rome fought back the only way it could. Not with assassination. With narrative, erase her virtues, magnify her flaws, invent new sins, repeat them until they become history. The fact that you know her name 2,000 years later? That's the part Rome never intended. And yet, Agrippina won. Here's the twist historians rarely admit. Agrippina shaped Rome more than the men who tried to erase her. Claudius's reign? Stronger because of her alliances, Nero's rise, entirely her architecture. Julio-Claudian continuity? She held it together when everyone else was stabbing each other in bathhouses. Even her enemies couldn't deny one thing. No woman in Rome had ever wielded power on her level, before or after. She is the blueprint for every dangerous woman the empire feared, the prototype for the villainous that patriarchy invents whenever a woman refuses to sit down. The myth survived, but so did the woman. Today, scholars are rewriting Agrippina's story, not to sanitize her, but to see her clearly. A survivor in a world made of knives, a strategist in a senate of assassins. A mother who believed her son was her legacy. A woman whose ambition was equal to the men who ruled, and greater than the men who wrote. Her myth endures because she was extraordinary. Her villainy endures because Rome needed her to be. Her story endures because she lived it so loudly that not even empire could silence her. The woman they couldn't kill, twice. Agrippina didn't just navigate the world Rome gave her. She conquered it. She manipulated it. She survived it, longer than almost anyone else in her dynasty. That alone made her dangerous, because Agrippina the Younger proved a truth still relevant today. When a woman refuses to apologize for her power, men rewrite her into a monster. But monsters are remembered, and Agrippina? She refused to be forgotten.
And that's where we leave her. On the page, in the archive, in the rumor, in the shadow she carved into history. Maybe she was a villain. Maybe she was a victim. Maybe she was something far more dangerous. A woman who refused the role she was handed. But one thing is certain. The world wasn't ready for her then, and it still isn't now. If you enjoyed falling down this rabbit hole of power, defiance, and the women history tried to bury, make sure you're here for the next chapter, because there are more of them, more rebels, more survivors, more legends disguised as scandals. Until next time, keep questioning the stories you were told, and keep an eye on the women they warned you about.